Hello, my name is Jay and I want to talk about something. Why motherboards and the RGB advertised on motherboards is not really true. So I've had a lot of instances in the past where RGB software and stuff and RGB stuff has been advertised on a motherboard and it's not really RGB. I mean, yes, you can select one color, but you only get to choose one color. And I want to talk about like the differences in the fact that this motherboard, which is about 70 bucks, which clearly advertises that it's RGB compatible. Also over here, this is a motherboard that's like 130 bucks and 150. And each one of these have different levels of RGB, where this one, where it clearly does have advertised that it does support RGB on the website, when you download the software, you only get to select the one color, red, and that's it. And so in the past, when I've been doing a build, for example, I was building this one, it was a really tight budget. It was a $600 budget PC. I had to go through and I had an RGB strip in there and I wanted it to look good. That was just so that it would look really nice. And so I had that RGB strip and it would not work with the motherboard. Why? Well, it just didn't. When you loaded up the software, all the correct software, you tried downloading stuff, there was a specific software you had to download, and none of the MSI official RGB sync stuff would download. Rather, you had to download this app that only had one color, which was red, and you had to download that just for this motherboard because it was such a low quality, or such a low, so I guess it wasn't their high-end stuff. Which raises the question then, if you're advertising RGB and you don't get the option to choose red, green, and blue, really, are you allowed to advertise that as RGB? Now, obviously, this motherboard besides that was fine. It's just when you advertise something and you buy something specifically to have that ability to do RGB, and it doesn't have it, well, there's some problems there. So for example, some other stuff, which is when you start getting into the more of the high-end stuff. For example, this is a quite nice motherboard in my opinion. Basically, you've got a lot of like advertising about RGB, and this has a lot of headers and pins for addressable RGB. Which is something that is completely different as well. There's only one RGB pin on this, and then this also has regular RGB pins and then addressable RGB pins, and so does this, I believe. So basically, the difference is that obviously, advertising this has an RGB pin, but it really doesn't have any software that makes it or drives the RGB pin, so it really doesn't have RGB compared to we've got RGB, and then we've also got addressable RGB, and then we've also got syncing across the board for the RAM. Everything can be synced, and this is really high-end RGB. So my point in making this video is trying to show you guys that there is not all RGB is equal. When a motherboard advertises, hey, I've got RGB, it really doesn't mean that you have to do some research, I guess, to make sure that the RGB you're getting is what you kind of want. And so, for example, this right here, this is by far also got some addressable RGB pins there, and it's got a lot of components actually that change color, a lot of the background. By far, this is one of my favorite motherboards for the X470, or for the X470 brand or chipsets from AMD, and that's just simply because the RGB is it's got the two headers, and then of course it's got the addressable RGB part, which is also something important for cases and stuff that want the ability to have specialized patterns, and it's also got components that have the RGB effects in the motherboard itself, and then we've also got Wi-Fi, which is something important just for people that bring their computers around places, to new places. Also, I just gotta say that, like, I've had some instances, as I said, in particular this motherboard, when I was building the $300 gaming PC, I had to do a lot of wiring differently just because the motherboard software was complete garbage. And I mean, there's been other motherboards too that I have back here, but in particular this one just kind of clearly advertises it, and it's clearly false advertising. So my point in making this video is if you're someone that's going for the lower end motherboards, usually for the higher end stuff it's not much of a problem, but if you're going for something low end, you might want to check to make sure, yes, it's RGB compatible, but also see if you can look at what the software is like, because the software on this does not support more than one color. It is literally just red. You cannot change the color. You cannot do anything. You just get, in the patterns itself, I think you get a single pattern. I think it's flashing, and that's it. And so, like, the amount of customization, it literally looks like they spent like maybe 5 minutes coding some software to support RGB on this. Meanwhile, this other stuff looks very nice. And the motherboard I have back here, my X370 Tiachi motherboard from I think it's ASRock. That's a great software too. It doesn't have the addressable RGB pins, but it definitely has RGB pins that are really nice, and the software is really nice. Meanwhile, the newer stuff even has the addressable options, which doesn't get distinguished as well. Like if it was up to me, I'd make probably something like a class 0, because this does not have RGB. Class 1 where it just has regular RGB pins, and then class 2 where it has addressable RGB pins. But that's going to wrap it up for today's video. I'm sorry this is more of a rant video. But I did want to kind of talk about, for those people that don't get screwed over, that are, here trying to find out what they should buy. Don't choose, when you do start looking at the cheap end, don't make the mistake of buying something and it doesn't have RGB. But thank you very much for watching. Thank you for joining me for a little bit of your day, and of course check out the channel for other cool tech-related news, videos, reviews, builds, news, leaks, and things like that. Goodbye.